On June 16, 2021, Governor Baker signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. This is an entirely remote meeting.
Thank you very much, Bill. All right, we'll start with opening the meeting with a roll call. Jack.
Here.
Glad to have you. George.
Here.
Robert.
Present.
Nate. Nate, didn't quite catch that.
Here.
I am present as well. And as always, not always, but Brian, our chair, is on temporary medical leave. Okay. So I think we can get started with the Dennis Yarmouth Regional School District presentation. We have David Flynn from DY Schools. And I think at this point you have sharing ability, right? Or Bill's got the
I'm
presentation.
doing that for him right now. I'll do that right
Terrific.
now. So David, whenever you're ready to move the slides, just give me a heads up.
So what I had forwarded to you was the presentation we had done last Monday for the public hearing on the budget. That way you're seeing the same information that was presented to the school committee and the public last week. Yeah, so if you got to do a Bill, and next slide, please. This one here was just our timeline. Obviously, I had the 7th highlighted because that was our meeting. The school committee's final vote will be on Monday, the 28th. And then it looks like the town meetings are April 26th and May 3rd for the 2 towns. On the next slide. I included some demographic data of our students just to show the diversity of the 2 communities down here. This is straight off of the Department of Ed's profiles. These are the subgroups and percentages that they report statewide for every school district. I thought it was just, a bit of information for those who are interested. And the next slide moves on to other subgroups that they also report on, such as, English is not your first language. You're an English language learner. You're a student with a disability. High needs means you fall into more than one category. So you could be more than any one of these other categories defined there. Then economically disadvantaged. And that's going to play in a little bit later on when we get to the increase that we're going to see in the state aid this year, is that economically disadvantaged of 59%. And that's actually a year old. We're up to about 61% this year now with the most recent data as to why some of the state aid is increasing. Next slide. This was just after the 21 year, the number of students that were reporting. This isn't 100% accurate because we're not quite sure where the Department of Ed actually gets this from, because we haven't been part of a survey, but they put it out there again for every district. This is actually a little bit lower than it was the year before, but we certainly think that COVID played a part in that. Normally the 4-year and 2-year college numbers are a little bit higher. The 2-year public college figure, 24.2%. That's a large number, and it's the great benefit of having the Cape Cod Community College right down the road. So as you can see, almost a quarter of the students, not that they all go there, but almost a quarter of the students go to start off with a 2-year public college. Then down the bottom, even last year with the hybrid and COVID and everything, that pretty proud of the fact that, oops, it'll back up the other way. It's just reading down the bottom, 40% of the juniors and seniors took at least one advanced placement course last year. So the high school is pretty proud of that figure. Now we can move on to the next one. So here's the foundation enrollment dating back to 2015, just as a point of reference. For the 2023 budget, you're going to take the 5-year average of 2018 through 2022, the gray shaded area in the middle for the 2 towns. So as you can see, overall, up until the purpley one down the bottom, enrollment was slightly declining every year on both sides, declining a little bit more on the Dennis side, so a little bit more percentage was moving towards Yarmouth. As you can see, for this current year, enrollment is actually up 44 students, but up a little bit more in Yarmouth than Dennis. So for the point of going into the 23 budget, the 5-year average of 2018 to 2022, there's a 32.063% for Dennis and 67.937% for Yarmouth.
And David, can you just remind us where we kind of go from here with regards to the agreement? I do recall that being the 5-year rolling average, but now that we're out, moving out of FY22, what's it going to look like moving forward? Is there a static number or static percentage?
No, it's always going to be the previous 5-year average. So
Previous
next,
5-year, okay.
then once we go into 2024, they'll all bump down one. So it'll be the 19 to 23
Gotcha.
5 years. And
Thank
just
you.
a point too that foundation enrollment is every student in Dennis or Yarmouth that we're financially responsible for. So that's not necessarily matching the enrollment at our schools, because we're financially responsible for kids through school choice who choose another school to go to. And we're financially responsible for children who go to charter schools, primarily the 2 charter schools on the Cape. And that does not include the number of school choice students that come into Yarmouth or Dennis, because they are financially responsible from their sending communities. So there's a plus and a minus to this figure here to get to our actual in-school enrollment, which was, at least back in October, I believe was 2,980. It was just shy of 3,000 was the actual student enrollment. But this figure, like I said, includes the students who go to other schools through school choice or charter schools. Next slide. So this was before the state aid came out in January 26, a slide I had used a couple times with the school committee, just showing that we'd actually been seeing a decreasing trend over the last 3 years in net state aid. Quite honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect this year. Now, the state didn't really tip their hand, and we knew the economy was going well. We didn't know where it was going to be. So then the next slide adds in the FY23 amount. You just jump to the next slide. There we go. So 7,506,020. So that's quite an increase, almost $2.5 million. And that's primarily due to the state's dedication towards, recognizing some increases in inflation, also through the Student Opportunity Act, picking certain subgroups within the foundation formula to address and raise up the per pupil amount. And I go into that to a little bit in the upcoming slides, but it's certainly very good news, very helpful, because that takes care of a large chunk of the increase in the budget, projected increase right there. Now, granted, this is the governor's version that came out on January 26th. The House and the Senate will have their revisions coming up. But most years in the past, the governor's version tends to be the most conservative. So it's I know it's my first year here, but it's my understanding that because of the timing, that this is the version that we go with going forward.
And David, I know you're going to get into a little bit more detail on the Student Opportunity Act, but just my high level question is this infusion a one-time thing or something that is in terms of particular areas to invest more in, or is that something that the state committed itself to over a series of years?
So
in other words, is this like a one-time thing that we should just be like not expecting it all next year, or is it a trend do you think we can expect?
My feeling is that thank you very much for this infusion this year, but I think we're going to probably go back to kind of a normal increase in years after that, because I think it's raising the base, right? So most of that increase, and it's in a later slide, is coming from the English language learners and the low income students, and bumping up the base that they're applying in the factor for those subgroups. And that's where we're seeing the benefit here in our communities. Now, they did that statewide. As an aside, the community I live in has very low numbers in those 2 subcategories. So my hometown saw almost nothing from this formula this year, while Dennis and Yarmouth are seeing 2.5 million. So it's my feeling that because that's what the state chose to implement this year, our mix of students is giving us the benefit this year. Now next year, making it up, maybe they'll just add to the base of your K-12 students. Maybe they'll put an additional amount on preschool. Who knows? I mean, I just wouldn't count on thinking that we're going to get $2.5 million again next year. I personally don't think so.
And just to clarify, do you mean that we shouldn't count on it going up again another $2.5 million, or we shouldn't count on the existing jump from 5 million to 7.5 million happening a second time.
I don't see an additional on top of the 7.5 increase. So I think what I'm thinking is I think this is setting a new base for us. I don't think
Okay,
it's
that's
going to
great.
come back down. I think it's going to bump us up this 2.5 million. And then that will be our new base going forward for whatever the formula will be in years forward from there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at.
And other than 2009, I mean, I've been doing school stuff since 1996. I believe 2009 was the only year the state ever cut Chapter 70 from one year to the next. So they've always had a very strong commitment to hold harmless, that even if your mix of students change, the state never cuts you from one year to the next. Now, you may see a very minimal increase from one year, but they never cut you back. The only year they did, because it was 2009, and actually the amount that you were cut, you received in the grant. So total cash wise, you were held harmless in that particular year. So that's why I feel that I don't think we would see us regress. I think it's a good bump up in the minimum, but I also think that this for us might be a leveling off next year. So we'll stay at that higher level, won't regress back, but I don't see yet another $2.5 million increase again the following year. That's just my crystal ball a year out, what I would think.
No, your insights are helpful. Thank you, David.
My next slide, oh, okay. So where does that come from? There's two sides to your state aid. There's the revenue and then there's the assessments. So this first slide here is the revenue side of it. The state aid Chapter 70 in and of itself going from 7.9 million to 10 million. Regional transportation up about 400,000. That's something that's all over the place. And again, when it actually comes time to pay it next year, that tends to get revised too, because that's one of the line items that the state says, you know, subject to appropriation and subject to the ridership. Every year, every school district submits a report that how many students rode the bus. What did that cost you? Within that, just, you know, you have to break out how many students live within 1.5 miles of school. The state doesn't count those children. So your percentage of children within 1.5 miles is a percentage that gets cut off of your total bill from your total claim that we submit to the state. They take all the claims statewide, compare that to how much money they have statewide, and then apportion out what's left on a percentage basis. So, you know, I'm just saying, say all the claims from the state was, completely making this up, $300 million. We get the state appropriates $270 million. You know, so that's 90%. Then everybody would get 90% of what that claim was, because that's the pool of money the state had versus the claims that come in. So that tends to bounce around each year. But again, at least right now in the governor's version, it looks like a pretty nice size increase for us. Charter school reimbursement.
And David, what percentage has that been the past couple of years of?
It's around 80, I believe. Like we actually got our first payment for this current fiscal year within the past weeks. It was based on 80%.
Oof.
One of the guys at the Department of Ed said that the first payment, they always estimate low because they're still, however they do it, they're still doing the different machinations and claims going forward. So when we received the second part of the payment, they felt pretty confident that was going to bump the percentage up to more than 80, but they weren't committing themselves to that right now.
But I mean, in terms of appropriation percentage.
Of what they feel it's going to be. That I'm not positive statewide.
Okay.
Like I said, for the current year that we're in, they based their first payment on 80% reimbursement.
Yeah. Then it was probably around that it was appropriated. That was when I worked for the former state rep for this area. We worked really hard on bumping it up to, I think we get up to a high of like 94 or 95%. It's sad to hear that it's gone back down.
But I think almost like with circuit breaker, they make the initial payments low. And then when you get your final payment, it's always more than the proportionate amount of the previous ones. It's just how much more, you know, so like I said, our first payment was based on 80. The Department of Ed rep last week said he feels that when we get the final payment, it'll end up being more than 80, but they weren't committing themselves to a figure quite yet. Then the next line, the charter school reimbursement. Oops, actually, I meant the next line. If we could just back up. Sorry, Bill. So on first blush, it looks like it's a good amount, right? $350,000 round figure increase. Oh, we get back up 2 slides. There we go. So we saw a sneak preview on the next one, but the charter school reimbursement revenue coming in is up 350,000. That's primarily because, as you're going to see in the next slide, the assessments are up quite a bit as well. Because the same Chapter 70 formula, Student Opportunity Act, which is giving us more money this year, they apply that formula to the charter schools. So the charter schools are also seeing an increase in the amount of their funding that they would receive, which comes from all of the member communities that are sending students there. So I mean, it's good and it's bad because the charter school reimbursement is up quite a bit, which is good. But as you'll see on the next slide, the assessment is also up as well. So I even highlighted it in red. It's going from 2.2 million to 2.6 million. So the charter school tuition is actually up 18% projected for next year. So that's what, $403,000. So at least a $350,000 increase in aid is covering almost all of the increase in the tuition. So they almost offset each other. But we do need to appropriate the 2.6 million in the budget because that is going to be taken from us. The top 2 lines relate to school choice, the special education portion of school choice, and then the school choice sending tuition. Really not up very much, $35,000 out of 2.3 million. So the total assessments are going up from 4.6 million to 5 million. And then now the next slide just recaps the net from the revenue and the expenses. So we have the state aid revenue of 12 million, less the state aid assessments of 5 million. And then school choice tuition leaves a net state aid of the 7.5 million, which is a $2,496,000 increase over this current year. The next slide. Okay, so this, you can see it's formatted differently. I actually copied and pasted this right out of the Department of Ed's presentation that they did, just explaining where the increase in Chapter 70 is coming from primarily. You can see statewide, they added 8.8% to it. So higher foundation rates for benefits, guidance, special education, English learners, and low-income students. So those bottom 2 was where we saw the increase the most. Then the next slide goes on to further define low income. So the state expanded their definition or eligibility for low income to families that make below 185% of the federal poverty level. It used to be 133. So while it looks like our numbers of low income have increased, a big portion of that is by them expanding their eligibility for being considered that. So it's not like we have 300 more families all of a sudden that showed up here. A lot of them qualified by changing the state changing the definition.
They were already low income. We just actually recognized that they were low income.
Exactly. Like they could have been a family, right, that by the definition of the formula, they were at 135% of the poverty level. It's still low income, but they weren't considered that. Now that they increased it to 185% for eligibility, it took a lot more families that could use the help and put them in that category. The state also considers, for the factors of foundation budget, low income if you are in those 3 bullet points. If you're receiving state public assistance, SNAP, and transitional aid to families with dependent children, if you're on mass health, a student in foster care, certified low income through the data collection process, that's parents who do submit their income to get verified. And then if you're reported as homeless through McKinney-Vento, you automatically qualify as low income as well. So I think my next slide goes on just a bar chart of just showing the, so green was last year, well, really this current year. Blue is the projected amount for next year. This here is head counts. So you can see pre-K up 12, the regular K to 12 students up 38. Special ed in and special ed out, that's a percentage formula. So those are not actual head counts. That's a assumed formula by the state. And then the English language learners up 50 students out of 300. And then your low income from 1445 to 1771, so up 330 students just about. So that's a big jump. And to kind of go back to the prior slides and what the definition is for this year now of low income.
Yeah, so just to clarify, that jump is reflective of the definition changing, not of the number of families changing.
It's both, but my point, I don't think, again, being my first year, I'm not 100% positive, but I would say that you didn't have 300 families that either move in or newly qualify. I'm sure some of it is, but a large portion of that is the expanded definition by the state.
Gotcha.
And then the next slide takes these foundation headcounts and puts them into dollars. So within the foundation budget formula, you can just see, pre-K is up 60,000. K to 12, it does add almost $2 million. Then in the ELL, the English language learners, up almost 200,000. And then again, the low income, 7.2 million to 10.3 million. So it added $3.1 million to the foundation budget, and by the expanded headcount and by the increased dollar amount that they chose to assign to each one of those students. Now with 62% of our families, round figure 61, 62% falling into that category, that adds round figures at another $5,000 per student into the formula. But you had, well, I don't have the per pupil now. But again, what the state did is, depending again, if you have, it's sliding bands. So 0 to 10% low income, you get one amount as your increment. 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 20 to 30, etc. So we're in the 50 to 60% band. So whatever dollar amount they assign to that is the per pupil amount that goes into coming up with the 10,347,000, which gets added to the base, because those are the same students that are included in the K-12 numbers. It's just, so it's not, if you're looking at the previous slide, you wouldn't add your head counts for the K-12 and your low income together. The low income is the number of kids within your K-12 head count that fit in that category. So the same thing with the dollars. These are additional dollars on top of the base for the same students because of falling into that category.
So what at that, I guess, 50 to 60% range, what is the minimum spending per student?
Well, hold on one second. I'm just opening up a spreadsheet on my other monitor here because I do have it. I just didn't have it open in front of me.
And obviously, for folks who are less familiar with school budget formulas and whatnot, the foundation budget is the minimum that, a town or a school district needs to spend per student. It's just the floor. We can always spend more than that. So I'd also be curious what this budget proposes be above that.
Right, so it's actually a 15% band. It's 54 to 69% that we fall into. So that's adding an additional $5,842 per student in that category to our foundation budget. The foundation, but that's what the low income was, a 5,000. What did I say? $5,842 per student on top of the base for those students.
And what's the base for those students?
I need to. I'm sorry, this is.
David, is that in the spreadsheet that you sent me?
Well, the base is
What you're talking
our
about?
pupil is not. It's in
All
a
right.
giant spreadsheet that has the entire state in it, which I'm looking at. So the Dennis Yarmouth total foundation per pupil is 14,330.
So this formula requires 14,330 plus an additional 5,842 for that band of income students.
Well, actually, the 14,330 comes out to be a weighted average because it's taking our enrollment and then, or it's really taking the foundation dollars and then dividing it by our enrollment. So the 14,330 is a weighted average inclusive of the 1,700 kids in that category.
Okay. So can you give us a general idea, even if you don't have the exact calculation in front of you, but for that category, what would, in general, we would be spending per student? ballpark.
Okay. So without any of the extra categories, meaning the special ed, English language learners, or the low income, the foundation budget is 9,476 for the K-12, or pre-K to 12 students.
Next one.
So here it is, just showing a couple of figures from it. Just so the top one is head counts, so up 44 students. The next one shows that the total calculation of the foundation budget is up 5,625,000. Now from that, the state also sets the minimum contribution for each town towards the total. So the minimum in total is up 3.2 million. So of that, Dennis's increase is 1.3 million for the minimum. Yarmouth's increase for the minimum is 1.8 million. And then it's not quick and simple math, but essentially you take one minus the other, and the chapter 78 is what's left over. So the 10,048,000 increase, right? I mean total, I'm sorry, with the increase being the 2,141,000 in the chapter 78 this year. Now you can also see in the blue, that's some pretty big increases in the required minimum contribution for the communities. It doesn't really matter because, as you mentioned, we support, thankfully, no budget that's above the minimum. But if you were a community that was only supporting your schools at the minimum, you could potentially see a required increase of 13% if you were Dennis, or 8.45% if you were Yarmouth. And again, that's the state implementing the portion of the formula where they feel that each town should have a target minimum amount of what the town needs to contribute, which is also, looking at the flip side, the state saying the target maximum that they want to give you and forcing you towards that ideal split. So, they raise the foundation budget, they raise the chapter 78, but at the same time, they're also increasing within the formula the minimum that the towns need to contribute. So again, for most towns, it's probably, I think last time I looked at it, 84, 86% of towns do contribute quite a bit above the minimum. So in real dollars, it doesn't really affect anything other than it just sets an increased base level for each community.
Could I raise a question, David? We've talked about the minimum relative to the, I don't know what those towns are today. Is it Wellesley still? But the town that has the largest expenditure per pupil, what is that number? And I know you don't have it for this year, but what was it for last year? Just ballpark.
It's certainly in the 20, the mid 20s,
20s.
in the 20s.
Oh my God, unreal. All right, that's all I wanted to know. Shouldn't be spending our time on the minimums, but focusing on, well, I won't go there.
And I would just follow up and ask if you know what the lowest is in the state that a school district is spending per pupil.
Probably around 13 or 14, which I can tell you, the community I came from before working here, we were the third lowest in the state. And some people wore that as a badge of honor, which I certainly never did, but that was, they would say, you need to learn to be more efficient. I'm like, you can't really be much more efficient than being a successful school and operating in the third lowest budget in the state. So to me, that was a very definition of efficiency.
Well, David, we've asked the highest and the lowest. What's the average?
No, I've actually, you want to wait 2 seconds? Because the state publishes that. I do have it in a spreadsheet. I'm just opening up again on my other monitor.
But
Yeah,
if
so
we're at about 14, that's discouraging.
Well, no, we're actually at about 18 once you add in when the state says what you spend, it's inclusive of the state aid, it's inclusive of the minimum. It's inclusive of what you pay above the minimum. And they also include what you spend out of the grants that the state gives us, because they figure the money's coming from the state and you have to spend it back out.
No, I understand that there are wealth neutralizing components here, but in the end, that's what we're spending on our students.
Exactly. So the lowest is actually
Relative to other towns who also get wealth neutralizing components, probably not as large as we do as a percentage of the overall state. But again, the top line is, I think, the important thing, not what minimum we pay, but what are our students actually getting?
So the minimum, just to answer that question, is I'm not quite sure what town it is. I've just sorted by dollar amount. Is 12,216. And then there are a handful of communities that are like 31, 32,000 per pupil. So it goes anywhere from 12 up to 32 statewide, with the state average at 17,575. Now that data is from FY20, so it's almost 2 years old now, but that's the most recent that they
Yeah,
published.
it's indicative.
I think I actually have a per pupil slide coming up at one of the ones that's further on in the packet here. I think we can go to the next slide. Yep. Oh, there it is. So of the 8 Cape Cod districts, we're 18,050. So, it's the third lowest, but not, it's certainly right there in the mix. Nauset, because it goes all the way out, they're so spread out there. They have a lot of costs because of the geographic location. So, we're not at the high end, we're not at the low end, we're kind of almost right in the middle. So our priorities this year in the budget, we really wanted to maintain just a level service budget, which to me was retain all our current staffing levels in all the buildings, and then meet our contractual increases in special needs, facilities and grounds, transportation for the busing, insurance and retirement. And then that was at the very first meeting of the school committee. And then we did address on February 1st, the increase in the charter school tuition. Then we also put in $290,000 to go towards building maintenance / fixed assets. Now, fixed assets is really just the accounting term that the state would use for the accounting function code that you would charge your expenses to. It's primarily, to me, ongoing, relatively small dollar items. I would say under $50,000 a piece typically, but that we should be addressing and having money in the budget for. Examples would be a couple of fire alarm panels that we have. Not that they're not working, but they're certainly at the end of their lifespan. They're out of date. They don't really make parts for them anymore. Could be anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 a building to replace something like that. To me, that's not a dollar level that we really want to do. Again, my personal opinion, a capital request from both towns, whether you're borrowing money, how does that come about? Those types of dollar amounts, I think we should be able to address within the school budget. There could be a rooftop unit that goes at the high school. Now that's $25,000, one of those, let's go. It could be, a Univent unit. It could be a small vehicle or, a high-end mower for the fields at the high school. So that's the types of things that I would envision that line item in the budget going towards, because quite honestly, right now, if there is one area that I've seen being new here that I think is a little bit underfunded in the budget, is a building and operations maintenance of equipment. Addressing things that, fortunately that we're building a brand new building, but your other buildings are quite old, some of them. And I just think that the level of the budget for maintaining them should be a little bit higher than what it is.
So David, if I may pause you for a moment and just ask Bill and possibly Bob, we've been having this conversation of kind of a change in philosophy within town departments in terms of making sure that there is budgeting going into just the operating budget of, basic things that are necessary to the everyday operations of the department. Is this approach that David's referencing here in line with that, or are there any other thoughts that you would like to add to this conversation?
No, I think proposal is very much in line. I think the key issue is, we would like to work with the school department to kind of keep track of what their capital needs are. But certainly to the extent that we can get some of the more, routine items into the budget, that is preferable. And that we usually, reserve the capital budget for some of the larger items. And I know that there's, a few larger building related items that we need a lot of discussion on to figure out what direction we're going to go, especially with the ME Small School and things of that nature. We certainly support, what's going on over at the regional school district. And I would point out their extra effort this year to participate in the capital planning process and in a very timely way, prepare, different priorities and send them over and keep us posted on everything. So I think it's very consistent with what's going on with other departments.
I had a feeling the only thing that made me scratch my head a little bit is the idea of like a roof, for example, being in part of the operating budget. That seems to me like that would be.
I think a roof would definitely still have to be a separate capital article.
Okay.
You mentioned, Station Avenue School, I believe it was built in 1996. I was now 26 years old. So probably in about 5 years, you're going to have to seriously start thinking about, is that going to need to be replaced or major patches or whatnot? If it had to be replaced, off the top of my head, probably $2 million. But that's not something they could ever just take out of probably any singular department's budget. You'd have to go out and bond for it pretty much, unless you had a huge pool of side money. So that would clearly be an example that we'd still use the traditional CIP process. If it
Terrific.
was, a section on the back that, we had a bad windstorm and you had, $10,000 to repair. Well, hopefully that's something that we could then have the money in the operating budget and address the $10,000 repair.
And I just want to kind of throw in another point on that. I think what's particularly important for us, and I think it's a huge improvement. And I really want to thank, both Dave and Carol for their efforts. Is that when the school department participates strongly in our capital improvement program, we can get their needs. And if there's say a roof in 5 years that needs to be replaced, and we're doing our 5 to 10 year planning, and the school department tells us that, now we begin to have public hearings and discussion and ask questions, and everyone understands the project. We move it along, we follow it closely through the design process, and by the time it gets to the point where we're asked to approve it and take out some debt and increase the assessment by that, it has received the type of vetting, the type of discussion and consensus that we need to make these tough decisions together with the school and not have it, be kind of a finger pointing exercise. So for us, having the school as our partners in the planning for the capital, it's really important and it's critical. And I think it'll help us, wrap our head around these projects and understand them better and not be in a position to, just, be opposed to them on principle when, they come up later.
Yeah, you always get a better outcome when people aren't surprised. Thank you. Please continue.
So here it is, the budget request, with 2 years of history prior to it, listed by the major Department of Ed function codes, which is how the budget is reported to the state, but also broken down here from your administration, your instruction, your pupil services. Now, I do believe, and was it you, Stephanie, that had asked a question in an email about they actually go down in the benefits and fixed charges? Somebody sent an email asking that.
That was me.
So that's really an accounting change, because within the 5,000, even though it says benefits and fixed charges, one of the line items is interest on a bond anticipation note, which we had on the new school. But in October, that ban was turned into a bond, a long-term 30-year financing. So the interest, now that it's permanently bonded, at least that initial portion of it, moves down to 8,000 debt service accounting-wise. So it was moving a payment that's pretty much the same in interest, which was ban interest this year, into bond interest next year, from 5,000 down to 8,000. You can see the single largest line item obviously is instruction, which was over $30 million. And I also want to point out the one number that's still in blue, debt service. That's going to change a little bit, and that was at the request of Yarmouth and your finance director Ed. There is still a small ban for a little over $200,000 that was outstanding from some prior projects. And I believe it is the town's intent to have an article at town meeting to just pay that off instead of keeping that out there in recurring payments for the next 4 or 5 years. So at his request, we offered the remaining outstanding balance on the ban with the banks just yesterday. I believe he got an interest rate of only 0.8% to get us through to, I think he said July is when he wanted to pay it off. What we have not received from the bank yet is what that exact payoff would be in July. I should have that by tomorrow. So that's the only thing I'm waiting for, is to change that debt service figure to match what the payoff will be on that $200,000 ban. Because included in that figure there was the exact amount that was paid this year on the ban. But where you want to pay it off, it's going to go up next fiscal year. Again, that was done at the town's request, and the bank did the work yesterday. I just haven't received the official packet from them yet.
Can I throw in just a point on the ban? I've been working closely to make sure that happens, and I know the school department is somewhat concerned that all of the town officials are together on. We have made representations that we have. The funding and the desire. I've been working on this since last fiscal year. I wanted to take care of it. We just didn't have the funds, and I was brand new. But so we want to sort of demonstrate, I think, to the school department, that we do have the support to take care of that outstanding issue. It is the responsibility of the town. And I know some questions came up. Well, what if, the town doesn't support it or something like that, and they haven't included it in their assessment. And we've sort of asked the school is, not to include it in the assessment, but that we would place that in their article and seek to fund it, and the town officials would recommend it. So I mentioned that to the finance committee, and so we hope you do support that element to retire that outstanding ban. The town of Yarmouth share we're gonna fund this year, and we hope that it goes through smoothly.
And our concern was really just coming from the bank advisor, because it's like, say, refinancing your mortgage at home and it's in your name, right? So refinancing the ban is actually in the name of the district, not the town. So the bank advisor was saying, well, if you're committing to refinancing this and telling us you're going to pay it off in July, we just want to know that you're actually going to have the funds in July to make that payment. So otherwise you'd have to refinance it again. So that's really what use the word concern from our point was coming from, was the bank wanting to make sure that we were going down the funding stream to come in to actually pay it off in July.
Right.
Just
And
remind us,
we
have
don't
we
wanna leave behind-
seen a draft of this yet in the warrant? It's not sounding familiar to me, but
No, it came up since the first iteration of the warrant. So we're gonna have an update, and it's gonna have that amount on it, and we'll be asking for support for that amount.
do committee members, it's hard to kind of react without seeing any kind of draft language. We've heard a general outline of what it is, but do committee members have questions while we have David here? Because it sounds like we wouldn't have a chance to ask him directly yet when we do review it. It's a quiet bunch tonight. Please continue, David.
Okay, so I think we can go into the next slide.
Oh, it does look like George has a question.
No, I'm just standing up.
So these next few slides are really just going through how the assessment calculation is calculated. So I debated taking them out because rows 1, 2, and 3 is really your old formula prior to, what was it, a few years ago when the regional agreement was changed. Carol had told me that certain people like to just see, well, what would it have been if we hadn't changed the agreement? To me, it is what it is. You have to go by the new one. So anyway, the first 3 lines show what your theoretical assessment would have been under the old agreement. And then lines 4, 5, and 6 are what it actually is under the current agreement. So you can actually see that it benefits Yarmouth because the old agreement, you would have been 35.7, and under the new agreement, it's 35.6. As you can see in the two green boxes, both of them come to the 52,638,320 total assessment to the two communities.
You know, I have to say, I'm not necessarily one of those who thinks it's necessary to go back, but as I recall, there were two old agreements. There was the original agreement that we came up with in the 70s that just did it, I believe, on a per pupil basis. And unfortunately, our town decided to renege on that. And then we had a second, we went with a state imposed formula, which I think is the one that you're referring to with these numbers here. And then from there, when it didn't work out for us, then we ended up going back into, you know, renegotiating it with Dennis. But I think possibly had we gone with just that per pupil spending, we might have had a completely different picture here too, if we just stuck with what we agreed to in the 70s.
Probably. And then even the most previous one, again, based on, only say 1 year's change in enrollment as opposed to a 5-year average change in enrollment. So it's, to me, the 5-year average helps smooth out the dips and the bumps too. So I'm not going to see a huge decrease from one town, from 1 year to the next. And you shouldn't see as huge of an increase either, hopefully, with averaging it out across the 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's just a good lesson for us all to learn in the importance of not looking just at the short-term benefit to, a formula change or what have you, but instead looking at the long-term, both financially and in terms of the relationship with anyone we're in an agreement with.
So if we go on to the next slide, this kind of continues through the formula. So row 1 is carrying forward the balance from the previous slides. Now again, the row 2 and 3, it's kind of a hybrid of the old formula, the current formula. Transportation clearly says in the current agreement that it's an operating cost. So it's pulled out just to be added right back in. So was a district-wide capital, for lack of a better term, of just putting the money into district-wide building maintenance and whatnot. It's still within the operating cost. So it comes out, it goes back in, still at the same split, the 32.063 and the 67.937. So then it gives you your total operating assessments of the 18 million for Dennis and 37,869 for Yarmouth. I put in rounding in parentheses because it was aggravating me. The trailing decimal points was, if you look straight down the column, it's going to be off by $1. Instead of overriding my formula, I just let it stay there. But in case anybody said, that doesn't add up, you're off by $1, I clarified it with my little rounding words there. So that brings you to, again, the total operating assessment, which is everything except for the debt, which is issued on behalf of the district or a specific town, which I believe is on the next slide. Okay, so we're still sitting on the operating side. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself with the slide. So this was the assessment not including debt for FY22 as the top line. What the assessment would be for 23 and not including debt. The increase for each of the two towns and the corresponding percentage. And so it'd be actually 2.498% increase for Dennis and only a 1.318% increase this year for Yarmouth, year to year operating assessment. Now you might say, gee, you guys are roughly, 2/3 of the students, 2/3 of the formula. Why is your percentage going up less? And that all goes back to the portion of the formula with the required minimum by the state. If you did back up a slide or two, you'll see that the if you wouldn't mind, Bill, just going back one, I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 slides. I think it's 2. Yep, back up one more. Those income, the required minimums in yellow, and we've done it quite a bit earlier. Those increases that I said were like 8% and 13% increases. because of the amount of increase in dentists in the minimum, that then affected the amount over the minimum for getting to the combined total increase in the operating assessment. So that's actually why they, in this one particular year, in this scenario, on a percentage basis, would owe a little bit more percentage-wise because you were both in the $400,000 range for the increase. So the same dollar amount increase, but you're going to lose to a larger percentage increase for them. We can jump back forward 2 slides. Yep. So then again, a 438,000 for them, 492,000 for Yarmouth, leading to the 2.498 and the 1.318. Now I believe it's the next slide that adds the debt in. Yep. So then carries forward again the operating assessments on line 1, the debt on line 2, and then the total assessment down the bottom there. And again, that debt service figure for Yarmouth could potentially change with the amount from the bank that we were just talking about with the bond. And other than that, there's only 3 things that are outstanding. There's the high school bond on the high school renovations. There is a bond for the Ezra Baker School, which is only on the dentist side, and the bond that's outstanding on the new building. And that's the only other debt that we have out there. And I believe that was my last slide. That picture was from the topping off ceremony at the new building. In case anybody wondering what that hunk of steel with a tree is on the top, that was when they put the last beam in place on the new building back in November.
Great. You don't have any more, anything else to share in terms of visual
Nope,
documents,
that was
right?
it.
Okay, I think we can stop sharing. Questions for David from the committee? George?
Yeah, Dave, to get back to my concern about where we stand relative to other towns in the state. You know, we've argued throughout this budget process about what can be done to attract people to come to Yarmouth. And we know we attract those who are retired and probably don't have children to go to the school. But that's not really an economically viable strategy for the town. We need to attract people who are going to work here, spend their money here. And I guess the thing that would attract them is educating their children here. So I have a huge bias. I spent most of my career in academics. But what is the average salary in Yarmouth relative to the rest of the state? And then I'm going to ask you the question, what is it relative to the highest, I don't know, whatever number you got, the top or the top quartile, whatever you got. And what is it relative to the bottom of the barrel?
So I don't.
And in that, I want the full compensation package. So not only what are the wages, but what are the benefits also?
So it's not something that I have off the top of my head, especially to compare it to any other community. The Department of Ed does collect some of that. I'm not sure it includes benefits, but they certainly collect salary data for every school district and they publish it. So I can certainly look into that and get you guys a little summary. I just don't have it at the tip of my fingers right now.
Okay. And, you know, I mean, one of the lessons we've learned this budget cycle is that almost every town department has a problem attracting employees. And it's a function of compensation. So I guess that's got to apply also to the school. And, you know, I think any sort of local research, I don't mean local, but on local municipalities, probably the number one factor that draws people to communities is the quality of the schools. So, and I'm going to tell you the number one factor that contributes to the quality of schools is the quality of the faculty.
Oh, absolutely.
And unless you're going to buy the best, you don't get the best. You want to buy the worst, guess what you get?
No,
And I'm not impugning our faculty. I know many of them, and I have a lot of respect for them. But I think they need more respect, I guess.
I understand.
In
what you're
dollars
saying.
and cents.
My mom was an elementary school teacher, so I grew up in a household with that. And, and, the trying to hire teachers is more Carol and Maria than me, but I'm more the support side. But even with the positions that I interview people for, if they can go and make $19 an hour at Walgreens, and we're offering them $17 an hour to come do something here, like, I'm going to go check people out at Walgreens and make more money. And then you try to sell them on, well, you might not necessarily get the health insurance we could potentially offer you, but sometimes, especially if they don't need it for whatever reason, they're just looking for cash in their pocket and what kind of work are they going to have to do, the hours. Sometimes people might want to work with little kids, but then they say, well, wait a minute, if I could go stand behind the cash register and make more money, do I want to deal with 5 and 6 year olds jumping on me every day? Unless you love it, maybe they don't want to. And not that they don't want to, I'm saying the dollar amount from something else might weigh out over their desire to want to potentially be in a school. So we certainly see it from that aspect. You see it on like grounds maintenance people. If you've got a local landscaper that's paying their people over $20 an hour to work. Now, granted, it might be seasonal, but a lot of people just want the cash in their pocket. So you see it across all levels. And then with the teachers, like I said, I have to do a little bit more research into that, but I'm sure that weighs into people's minds as well, especially if you're new or in the middle, right, thinking about making a change. If you've already been here for 20 years, you're probably going to stay here. But if you're thinking about moving down here, moving anyway, you want to say, okay, where am I going to be on that teacher scale? Where am I going to be in 5 years on that scale versus somewhere else? So that does weigh in when there is turnover and you're trying to find somebody. And again, I have a lot more experience in my prior job. My town was right next to Mansfield, which was known for paying high. And we would lose new employees all the time to Mansfield over $2,000 or $3,000, which on the one hand, you might say it's not a tremendous amount of money. But if you're 24, 25 years old and you've got your student loans and you're trying to start off, that $3,000 is a big deal to you. So again, haven't had enough time to really look at us compared to neighboring towns down here. They're certainly on my mind going forward to see where do we stand as far as attracting and retaining quality staff across all positions.
I just want to make one more comment, lest I'm accused of ignoring the financial, necessities of people having to meet their bills. And, people in this town need to make sure that what we spend our money on is done deliberately and prudently. But I'm also going to say spending on education is a very prudent expenditure. If in true everything I've said can be verified, that is, people come to places where schools are better, that means the value of people's property, and for most people, that's the only major asset they hold, goes up. And if you don't, it goes down.
Exactly.
So I would just piggyback on George's question somewhat with a caveat that what we pay people is certainly a critical decision point for them in terms of what they decide when it comes to, do I work here or do I work elsewhere? But, and I know that you said that Carol is more responsible for the hiring, but to what degree is the high cost of housing or the lack of attainability in terms of housing impacting your ability to attract new workers to replace any people who are retiring, for example?
I certainly know that we've actually run into that with a couple of positions in special ed. Maria was interviewing some people who didn't live on Cape, lived just far enough away that they were going to have to move. And she had 2 really good candidates end up turning us who had accepted a job and then changed their mind before their start date. Because as they started looking at, gee, what can I afford? What can I get? What's available in my price range? And they're like, I'm not going to move out of my house I'm in now to buy something that I don't like that I can afford. And they ended up turning us down for, pretty specific special needs positions, which are hard to find. We were happy to find the people and to have them turn us down, not because of us, but just they couldn't afford to live within the commute that they wanted to have.
Yeah, I hear that story all the time from employers, and we have certainly heard similar stories as we've interviewed town department heads. And it's not just what we pay people, because frankly, right now, households making $200,000 are struggling to find housing that they can afford, both on the rental and homeownership side in the Cape's housing market. So we're not going to pay everyone $200,000 or $250,000 unless everyone wants to have their taxes go up a lot more. So addressing our housing shortage, I think, has to be part of our kind of vision for sustainability financially for the town. But that's my personal position. Other questions for David from the committee? I had one more, which was just on your capital. You did reference, and Bob referenced working with the town's capital process. So are your capital items in the CIP or are they separate?
I had submitted a separate list to the town, which included, just so you could see it district-wide, all building by building, a handful of requests for each building. So there were some capital, such as a couple of vehicles up at the high school district-wide. There was some painting, floor tiles, things like that for the Station Avenue School. Short-term, some drainage work out at Emmy Small. There's a lot of work that needs to be done at Emmy Small if you want to keep that building long-term. And obviously nothing for Mattakey's, because we're not sure what's happening with that. We're just trying to make sure we limp along for another year with that. But the short answer is there were some relatively smaller dollar requests capital-wise that came separate outside of the budget. And the ones that if it's not in the budget, that would be split between the two towns. The exact same list was given to Dennis as well.
I think it'd be helpful for us to see what that list is, and also for us to know what, if any, funding from your E&D fund you're putting towards it.
I can certainly send out the list again. I know Bill has it from before, and as of today, that hadn't been decided whether any E&D was going to be put towards those projects. It hasn't been certified yet. I've actually just this week been going back and forth with the Department of Revenue. No matter what you submit, they're going to do their additions, deletions, machinations. They hope to have it done within the next week or two. So once that dollar amount's done, again, I think it's just, I hate saying, I'm new, so I'm not 100% positive, but I think the next normal course of action might be with Carol through the school committee. Would the school committee wish to apply any of that towards a specific project or anything like that?
Yeah, if someone could forward us on what those items are, I think it'll be helpful. So that's all the questions that I have. Again, one last call from the committee for questions for David.
Stephanie and I have that list, and we just finished incorporating it into the CIP. And pull it up quickly for you.
Bill, you must have had a Teams meeting today. You're having that microphone issue again.
Yeah, you sound like a frog, Bill.
Thought he was under a bridge.
How's this sound?
Much better.
Better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
see if I
great.
can pull up the file.
So David, what town did you come from? Where was your last job?
So I worked for the town of North Attleboro for the past
Yeah.
22 years before being here. And
Well, welcome.
I live in Acushnet, just outside of, not many people know where it is. It's tucked in around New Bedford, Fairhaven, home of Titleist.
Us
Pretty town.
golfers know where that is.
And I'm pretty sure there's an apple picking place in Acushnet that I've been to a few times.
There's several. There's Peter's Orchard, there's Pine Cloud, there's Ashley's.
Nice.
Everybody see the list in front of them? This is
Yes.
right out of the
Yep.
report. So I'm just going to go over each, and David, I've allocated the amount based on that proportionate share that you gave me. This is the items within the context of the rating. The score is to the right, and then the school items is here. I don't know if you want to go over them as we go down. I'll just point at them. There's 2 pickup trucks, as David mentioned. Fire alarm panel at the schools. Parking and drainage at the schools. If anybody stop me if you have any questions. Transit Connect work van at the schools. Floor tiles, as Dave mentioned. Salem, I'm sorry, the elementary school, Station Avenue. ME Small plumbing at 550,000. And the school's guardrails. And then interior painting and lower tennis courts. So
I'd say we need to figure out what we're gonna do with ME Small sooner rather than later.
yeah, that was one of the comments by the CIP committee members is the relationship between its potential disposition and large investments.
And as long as we're mentioning ME Small, I mean, yeah, I know Carol, for the past couple of years, has submitted to the MSBA, for them to potentially take ME Small into a program there where we could get more than half the money back from the state. Haven't been accepted yet, but doesn't mean we're not going to keep trying. The window just opened up about 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, to start submitting the applications again. And I have until the beginning of April to do so when they'll start looking at them. So I have every intention of resubmitting our application to have them look at ME Small again to do the feasibility study, renovation. At this point, we'll take whatever the state would offer us if they would accept us into it. So we're certainly putting the application in again.
David, I'm not too sure about that because as I recall from my time working for Cleon, the school building authority requires you to continue intended usage of that property after they fund it for a significant period of time.
Well, correct. If they were to do a major renovation project with us, right, they would want you to say, I forget whether it's 15 or 20 years, but they want you to commit to that you would intend to use it for that long. But they could, it's against my belief that when the new school ended up being the MSBA starting off by looking to renovate Wixon and or Mattakees, right? And the end result was you'd spend less money and get a new building. So the first step is still to always have them look at the existing facility, and they may very well say, would you want an addition on your Station Avenue Elementary School instead of renovating this old building for roughly the same money and you want something new? And that's not saying that would happen, but it's certainly a potential of how the MSBA may look at it. But to get back to your initial point, you are correct. If we were to say, hey, put a roof on this building, they say, okay, yep, we'll give you 52% for the roof. Well, in that, we're supposed to say, yep, and we're going to keep it for the 15 to 20 years as a school, as our commitment to that 52%. So there really needs to be a combined look at does the town even want to keep it for that much longer versus the MSBA having interest in the building in its current state, or would the MSBA even offer up an alternative once they come and look at it? But the first step is to identify we have a building that has needs, and those children need to be somewhere, whether they're in that building or another building, and hopefully catch the state's eye and have them come down and take a look at it and see if we can get into some sort of program with them, whether it is there or in addition somewhere else.
So this would be more kind of an assessment evaluation stage.
Correct, because they've got two programs. One is like a specific thing, like we want a new boiler, we want a new roof, or is it we have, I forget the exact term that they use, but it's more look at the whole building and its facility, look at the overall needs of it versus the value of the building. Is it worth doing something to that specific building or doing something else? So
Yeah.
that's the route that we're going for, not a specific item, but to have them evaluate the building and see if they would potentially partner with us for something.
Okay. Yeah, good to
Basically on
know.
the VOTEC, when I was set on the VOTEC committee, and the first thing we looked at was repairing the existing building. And because of the asbestos and a whole bunch of other things, it was actually cheaper to knock it down and build it and build a new one rather than trying to patch up what you already had. And I think that's going to be the same thing as what David's talking about with the other school.
Because Wixon is full of asbestos and PCBs, so I'm sure that was part of the state's analysis, and that boy, that building would need so much that they don't even want to tackle rehabbing that building. Let's move towards new construction. So then the first step is to get the state to look at ME Small for us.
Makes sense. Yeah. And just we just don't want to try to do what Brewster tried to do, because we tried very hard to get they wanted to switch an elementary school with town hall, and do some consolidation because of declining enrollment, and they'd already committed to an SBA loan, and the state would have made them pay it back.
Yeah.
So, and it was a really good plan too, and it was unfortunate. Any questions on capital beyond this for David?
So David, in the plumbing system, do you have full designs and bid specs for that? There was a question I got from CBC members.
No, we do not. That was from the engineering study we had done at the building. So they just pretty much looked at the
All right,
state that it was in, you know, how much is it underground, through walls, whatever, how much the extent of it, and applied just a building factor to it. We have not gone and actually had building specs and designs done for that. So that cost just came from an engineer's first glance estimate at it.
all right, because not to do CIP business at FinCom, one of the discussions was if you were given engineering money, would it be about the same time if you came in at a later town meeting, you know, and not lay out the whole 550, you know, engineering bid specs, all that kind of stuff. I'll email you tomorrow.
Right, so, and then that was already take time. I mean, that would be the first step no matter what you did. So
Right,
that could also be a route too, is to have it more than the cursor, not that it was cursory, but you know, what I mean, getting actually into it,
Right.
what would really be involved. That could certainly be a first step funded separately.
right. And when you get up to those numbers, they like to see something more than the sort of level of study.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thanks for that commercial interlude into CIP.
All right. Well, thank you, David, very much for your time this evening. I'm sure if we have further questions, we'll communicate to you through Bill.
Sure. And it's nice meeting you all virtually. I appreciate it. I'm marked my 6-month anniversary last week. I'm happy to be here, and any of you guys, Bob or Bill, whatever, you got my number, email, feel free. I'm here. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, we'll
David.
welcome, and please extend our hellos to Carol, and we certainly last year, unfortunately, I don't think we had any presentation because of Ken's untimely passing, and we're all very sad to hear about that. And I think even at the time we did a moment of silence for him because he was such a terrific guy. So no pressure about shoes to fill. We welcome the unique contribution that you'll bring.
I hear that about him a lot, and I'm sure he was a great man. And like I said, I like being here, but honestly, I wish it wasn't under that circumstance for you guys.
Bob, did you want to mention anything else?
No, I don't have anything else. Thank you very much, David. Give our regards to Carol. And
Well-
we're happy to be working together with you and taking a look at some of the long-term issues as well as short-term. So it all helps.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, David. All right. On to old business. I believe, okay, that would be new business. Do we have any old business?
We have minutes approval. I'll share the screen quickly. What I did was take the comments from people, put it in onto the sort of table of contents for the minutes that we had. And here are some of the comments throughout the below minutes. Edit the reference to Robert Ciavara to include 2 Rs where applicable. Where applicable, and where 2 persons are indicated as making a motion or seconding a motion, have the first person listed as the originator of the motion. That is generally throughout some of the minutes. There's only a few instances of that. 127 FinCom was not working on a mission statement, should be a warrant report statement, and I have excerpted the reference to where it, the mission statement was referenced. And then 42221, Stephanie, the chair gave me a reference to correct the statement regarding Article 26. The correction is up here, and the article is there. So what I've done is to cover everything, the Yarmouth Finance Committee at a meeting on February 16, 2022, approved the below list of minutes with the amendments as indicated in italics. That'd be your motion to cover all these things and all the minutes that were sent.
Do I hear a motion?
Can I ask a question beforehand?
Sure.
You know, my memory is not going to be able to go back to these clearly. So what I'm wondering is, do we have electronic files, either video or audio, of what transpired for each of these meetings?
I'm not aware of that. We found these in the server. Mr. Lawton brought them to our attention that they were sort of not approved. They were completed. Some of them have Word. Most of them are in the form that you probably see up on your screen.
All right, so this is our definitive record.
Correct.
Okay,
And source is down the bottom of most of it.
But I think that videos of our meetings, they should be online up through, I think, the summertime. And that's when for some reason, we don't have them right now.
I have everything we've been doing with all the departments right
And it's up on YouTube and the website.
now. No, not yet. We were going to try to get them in minutes, but we can post them as you might see fit.
okay.
Any other discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to accept the minutes as presented with the amendments as listed.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, George, Jack,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Robert,
Aye.
I'm an I as well. Thank you, Bill. Nice to get that out of the way.
Yes, and the new business, we have the fire department requesting essentially, and let me stop the share. Basically requesting that we restore overtime for $50,000. I will get you the, I sent the email out to everybody as it came in. I'll put it up on the screen for you just for recollection. And let me get
So we're
it.
considering this under old business or new business?
I would say new business because you essentially voted on that department. So it'd be new business to amend their budget to reflect the request for $50,000 to be added to overtime.
Bill, can you make this bigger?
I'm trying to.
Thank you. Much
Does that
better.
work?
Yep.
Okay. Let me stretch it so we get the whole thing in there. Yeah, that's it. Can everybody read that?
Yep.
Fire department OT budget was reduced by 50,000 for FY 21 and 22 due to concerns with town funding during the pandemic. 50,000 went to free cash. We are asking that 50,000 be restored to bring us back to where we need to be. Deputy Chief Sawyer has given us a detailed indication on what happened, and he's requesting that it be restored 50,000. And what you would do is you provided a preliminary vote for this of approval. You would vote to add this back in to their budget if you see fit. Any more questions on this?
I mean, so this just kind of came in. I mean, Bob, what's your perspective given?
I concur with this request. I reviewed this item with the chief and we discussed it at length during the budget discussions. But, you know, as you recall, I'm required to have my recommendations in by January 1. And at that particular point, we were forced to reserve a much larger amount for potential educational assessments. So I just didn't, have the confidence to restore those funds. We talked about in my budget transmittal, most of the increases that are incorporated in the request are the restoration of funds that were removed during the pandemic. And this was one of them that I just hesitated on doing. And the fire department followed up with us, and in reviewing their budget in detail indicated that that was of particular importance to them. I would point out in the police department, there was a similar 50,000 cut to the overtime, as a result of the reduced revenues during the pandemic, and that was restored. And I concur with restoring these funds. And I think there is adequate money to be raised and appropriated without having to use free cash or anything.
And we haven't seen the tech school budget at this committee level, but I'm assuming that you have seen something at this point.
The tech school budget is proposed to, the assessment is proposed to actually decrease by 333,000. And we had estimated a decrease of roughly, I think it was 138,000. So it's a couple of 100,000 just in that one to the good. And I think you're going to you're set for the next week or two. I know it's set up to get a major presentation from the tech school on that, but those numbers look good as well.
Okay, so you feel
Yes.
confident we've got the room in the budget for it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, other questions?
Is there any possibility, Bob, that we're going to see another department asking for restoration of funds lost last year?
Well, yes, I think there could potentially, I'm trying to keep the dampers on that. If I looked at departments with, particular issues, I know the DPW was hit quite hard, but we haven't opened up the budget process again. I think that we want to try to avoid doing that. Another area that I had recommended right up until, probably New Year's Eve in my budget that I finally cut was in the conservation department. I know they had requested some additional assistance with the regulatory workload in that department. And there was some part-time staffing that I had cut that I need to maybe check back with those folks. That was in the neighborhood of, I think, 25,000. So that might be the only other things. And so, but I don't favor reopening the budget process and doing a lot of increases at this point. I think we, try to stay as close as we can to the recommended budget and bring it to town meeting and, be conservative in that respect. But I will say this, the one change that we're trying to work on, that the slightly lower budgets in education will facilitate, and we're still evaluating what exactly that number is, and we'll be coming forward soon on that in the town meeting warrant. Is that, if you recall, it was some of our initial budget goals was to attempt at the capital budget of 1.5 million had previously been removed from the levy budget, placed out on free cash. The roadway maintenance budget, I think that's about 1,378,000 or so. That was removed from the levy budget and placed in free cash. And with the budget that I had initially recommended, we had hoped to take 750,000, which is maybe a quarter of all of those funds, and restore that to the levy budget. And what we're evaluating now is, with these new educational numbers, what we hope to do is restore a larger portion of the roadway maintenance to the levy budget. And that would be consistent, I think, with the goals of the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. And so that is one thing we're working on, is on that free cash article, trying to get as much of that 1.3 million back under the levy budget and out of free cash, because we consider that an operating budget item.
It makes sense, and I think that would be terrific if we would be able to do that, make that much of an advancement back to where we should be this year. Other questions from the committee on this particular item, the restoration of the fire department overtime? Yeah, I do recall the fire chief referencing that there was a reduction for both, but only police got restored. And I remember thinking at the time that didn't seem particularly fair. So I would support that, but I also want to check in with the committee. We only just got this. Does everyone feel comfortable voting on a motion so soon after seeing it?
I've got no problem with it.
I'm ready to vote.
I'm good with it.
Okay, Robert, what about you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, then I will accept a motion. Bill, I'm gonna need your help with the wording of this motion.
I move we
Motion
approve.
to, okay, go ahead. A motion to increase the overtime budget as indicated in the email from Deputy Chief John Sawyer, sent on this date, the 16th, to Mr. Scott. And then we'll use this as our evidence as part of the budget process.
Anyone want to say so moved?
I'll move it.
Okay, George,
Second,
second from Jack. All those in favor, Jack,
aye.
George,
Aye.
Robert,
Aye.
Nate,
I
I'm an I as well. Thank you. Okay.
So just to go over, next week, you will. be
Oh,
having-
Bill, your sound is, you sound like a frog again.
Speakerphone. How's that sound?
Much better.
Much better.
There you go. Next week, the tech school will be in. I will be sending the presentation and everything out tomorrow. And we are working on the warrant to just make some changes and corrections, and we can have that for next week also. In addition, I should have the first draft of the report to you next week, and wanted to just have a brief discussion on some of the issues you might want to articulate so I can get those down for the report. And some of the ones that have come up are that it is not essentially, it's not a cost issue in the sense that departments are at sort of the budget limits. It's a revenue issue. There was an indication in some of them in terms of a difficulty obtaining staffing due to external factors. I was wondering if there are other things that you would want to mention in the budget. One of the things I would mention in, not in the budget, but in the report, is that from a revenue perspective, we need more economic development. You mentioned it in your reports and warrants before, to increase the revenue side to help with some of these budgets. So are there any other sort of bullet list items that you want to include in a report that I can sort of bring into the narrative? And I will send out an email with these questions too, but I mean, to start a dialogue, we can talk about them now, if the board of finance committee wants to.
I think it might be worth having that so that you can get as complete a draft as possible.
Okay, I'll do that.
What do folks have for any other kind of themes or bullets that it would be helpful in the narrative of the report for Bill to include? I would add, like you said, growing the tax base, so that we're not, hitting the same taxpayers over and over again is something that you mentioned, but more specifically, growing commercial revenue through making sure we invest in infrastructure, as we've already taken that first step at fall town meeting, kind of referencing that, looking back to kind of look forward and saying we need to kind of continue in that way. Areas for investment that would lead to, opportunities for the town to offer regionalized services to other towns or otherwise derive new revenue from might be something else to consider, depending on how the committee feels about those items.
Are there town properties that we could, in the business districts, that we could make available to businesses to come in to build or to come here and employ people?
Well, it's all really a function, of both zoning and infrastructure. And I think in large part, the zoning for a lot of these areas is there, but we don't have the infrastructure in terms of the wastewater. So most businesses would have to build their own septic tanks and then potentially have that replaced within a few years when sewer happens. So there's not as much willingness to take that risk as far as a business owner.
I was thinking up around the UPS area, up in that business district up there in the little industrial park, whether there's properties up there that we own that we could, help assist somebody in the building area.
Yeah, I think that would be maybe something that we would need to talk in more depth about and get as part of a longer term conversation to have more specific recommendations. But I think we could fit that into the bucket of growing commercial property. Robert?
Yeah, it's killing me not to talk about this for another half an hour. But what if we just, any ideas we have, we can send them over to William.
Okay, I will send out an email with what I've got so far and I'll send out the capital report because there's some similarity in the capital report. They mentioned use somebody else's money where departments should take a hard look at other sources of revenue to make, their needs met. Fire has been good at that as police in terms of available grants, as you'll see in the warrant, for fire. So I'll give you a bullet list of what I have to date, show you the CIP, and then we just come back and I'm going to start writing the narrative, and you should have a draft probably by Monday or Tuesday to discuss. And then one more meeting to finalize a report, and it goes to the town administrator on the 1st for the hearing on the 15th.
But I would say generally for, you do reference it's sort of not that it's not a cost problem. It's, we're not paying people adequately. I would say kind of if that could be in a broader bucket of,
Sure.
We need to address growing costs associated with employees. And some of that is competitive wages and, the packages that we offer, but that's also employees' access to attainable housing. It's also healthcare costs. And so, holistically as a town that we need to be looking at addressing all of the growing costs associated with town employees, I think is maybe a theme that we could include. And we could also, again, just as a broad brush stroke, talk about the need for finding cost savings through consolidation and economies of scale. Those would be the two other items that I would mention.
I guess I see another way of actually packaging that. What we're trying to do is build the town's assets, its labor force, its the infrastructure that we have, what it is about the town, our recreational, our natural resources, as opposed to the cost of living in Yarmouth, or how cheap we are, or that kind of thing. So I see it as a relative trade-off. We want to build up the assets that make up Yarmouth, and that's going to take some expenditure. That's going to take some cost. But in the end, we'll be better for it. Our revenue stream will increase faster than our cost will. And if we can do this prudently, we may even be able to reduce some of the cost per person.
Yeah, I think though, just keeping with kind of the simplicity for the taxpayer's sake, you know, the message that we used in previous warrant messages was costs are going to go up no matter what. We don't have a choice in that matter. Healthcare costs go up, wages, cost of living expenses go up. That is a guarantee that that is going to happen. If we do not grow our commercial tax base, if we do not grow kind of the, you know, the available pool of funds that we can pull from, then that puts the existing residential taxpayers in the same position every year of either having to race to the bottom, decreasing available services, or to, you know, face taxing themselves. So I think starting out with that kind of framing of it, of, you know, given this reality, given this, these are the facts, you know, here are some of the things that we're kind of thinking about.
I think if I may, to George's point, fiscal impact analysis will tell you that as you grow your commercial side, which ones give you revenue and which ones cost you services. And so I think those are the kind of things that in the future moving forward, we want to look at, to the extent that we know we want to increase our tax base on the commercial side to create more sort of levy diversity and not rely as much on the residents. But at the same time, you don't want to do it in a manner where you get an overabundance of uses that require fire and police and other responses that require increase in budget. So I think that fiscal impact is something that as the sewer project moves forward, we should be taking a look at to make sure that as we grow, we don't grow into a position where we proportionally need more services than we did before.
And I think the Cape Cod Commission might have technical assistance that they can offer with doing things like that as well. So, all right.
So I'll get these together for you and then send them out, try to get some data in terms of patterns. And so probably by Tuesday of next week, it'll be sent, not to discuss in any detail on Wednesday, but to sort of discuss at your last meeting so we can wrap up the report and get it to the town administrator and the board of selectmen. And again, looking at March 15th for the hearing, and same thing with CIP.
Okay. Last thing, item, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just we should have a more detailed warrant for you probably by next Tuesday. Also, we can go through that so we can wrap that into your report.
If at all possible to get any of that sooner, it'd be great, but
Okay.
certainly the school budget presentation before the weekend.
Right.
Last item, just, you know, we did go through the minutes, but can you just tell us, so that was through, I think, what, April 15th? Where are we in terms of minutes from since then?
We'll be getting to those. I'll finish up the report and we'll be trying to push some of these Zoom meetings either to online so that they have access to the meetings and also start the process of turning the video into the minutes. So we'll wrap up the report and then go through the minutes for this last series, moving backwards.
Okay. And are we, it doesn't seem like we're going live on local access like we used to. Is there any reason for that?
I'm sure we're not in the hearing room. So usually those meetings that go live on local access are out of that room, aren't they?
I don't know.
So
Okay.
we've been running fully remote. I mean, we can push this live to YouTube in the future if you want to.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, just from a transparency perspective, I think it's
Right.
important to be consistent. That and, you know, the local access, like once it's recorded, it can go to them and they can get
I
it
can
out
do
for seniors who are not necessarily going to be watching it on YouTube. All right. I think that is it. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thanks, Jack. Second.
Second it.
Thanks, Robert. All those in favor, George,
Aye.
Robert,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Jack.
Aye.
I am an I as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bill, Bob, have a good evening.
Folks,